Laura Bennett's feet were screaming at her. 12 hours straight at Rick's diner, and all she had to show for it was sore legs, grease stains on her uniform, and tips that barely added up to $40. She grabbed the bleach spray and wiped down the last booth, the one near the window where old Pete always sat with his coffee and newspaper. The clock on the wall said 11:45. 15 more minutes and she could finally go home. Arizona in November was weird like that. Blazing hot during the day, then the temperature would drop like a rock once the sun went down. Tonight was especially brutal. The wind howled outside, rattling the diner's windows, sneaking through every crack and gap in the old building. Laura pulled her thin cardigan tighter around her shoulders. It didn't help much. She dumped the dirty rags in the laundry bin and grabbed her purse from under the counter. Time to face reality. She unzipped the worn leather wallet and counted what was inside. A $20 bill, 2 5s, 3 1s and some loose change. $38.67 to be exact. That 20 had to last until Friday's paycheck, and tomorrow morning she needed to pick up Katie's prescription. Her daughter had been fighting a bad ear infection all week, and they were down to the last dose of antibiotics. The refill would cost at least $18, maybe $20 if the pharmacy decided to be difficult about the insurance. Laura closed her eyes and did the math in her head. $20 for medicine. That left $18 for gas, food and everything else until payday. 3 more days. She'd done it before. She'd skip lunch, water down the orange juice, tell Katie they were having breakfast for dinner because it was fun, not because eggs were the cheapest thing in the fridge. She locked the front door of the diner, testing it twice like Rick always reminded her to do. The parking lot was empty except for her beat-up Honda Civic sitting under the broken streetlight. She'd been meaning to park somewhere brighter, but the good spots were always taken during her shift. That's when she heard it. A sound. Low and raspy, like someone trying to breathe through a broken accordion. It came from behind the dumpsters near the back corner of the lot. Laura's first instinct was to get in her car, lock the doors and drive away fast. Nothing good ever happened in dark parking lots at midnight. She'd watched enough crime shows to know that. Her hand was already digging for her keys. But then she heard it again. That breathing. It sounded wet and painful, like whoever was back there was really struggling. What if someone was hurt? What if they needed help? Hello? Her voice came out shaky. Is someone there? No answer. Just that terrible breathing. She should leave. She should absolutely leave. But her feet started moving toward the dumpsters anyway, her phone clutched in one hand with 911 already pulled up on the screen, ready to hit call. The smell hit her first. Not trash, surprisingly. Something else. Metallic and strange, like pennies mixed with campfire smoke. She rounded the corner of the dumpster, using her phone's flashlight to see. What she saw made her brain stutter and freeze. It was a creature. There was no other word for it. Easily 7 feet tall even though it was slumped against the brick wall like a broken puppet. Its body was covered in bronze-colored scales that caught her phone's light and gleamed dully. Wings, actual wings, hung limp at its sides, the leathery membranes torn and dirty. Its face was reptilian with a long snout and ridges above its eyes. One of those alien soldiers. The Drakkar. She'd seen them on the news, read about them in the papers. Part of some intergalactic coalition that had made contact with Earth 5 years ago. They had a military base outside Tucson, trained with human soldiers, helped with disaster relief. The government said they were allies, friends even. This one looked like he was dying. His eyes cracked open, glowing amber in the darkness like a cat's eyes caught in headlights. Please, he rasped in accented English. Go. Dangerous. Not safe. But Laura saw what he was trying to hide. His whole body was shaking, scales clicking and rattling against each other like chattering teeth. She'd watched enough Animal Planet with Katie to know the basics. Reptiles were cold-blooded. They couldn't make their own body heat. And tonight, with the wind chill, it had to be close to freezing. He wasn't dangerous. He was freezing to death. Oh God, Laura whispered. She looked around the empty parking lot, then back at the shivering soldier. Okay, just stay there. She ran back to the diner, her hands shaking so hard she could barely get the key in the lock. Inside, she grabbed the thermos she'd used for her own coffee, filled it with the hot stuff from the pot she hadn't cleaned yet. She yanked her cardigan off and grabbed the emergency blanket from under the counter, the scratchy wool one Rick kept for cold nights. Then she stared at her purse. At that $20 bill inside. Katie's medicine. 3 days until payday. All the logical reasons not to do what she was thinking. Laura grabbed the 20 anyway. When she got back, the alien soldier had slumped further down the wall. She knelt beside him, trying not to think about how his claws could probably tear through her like tissue paper. She pressed the thermos into his hands, wrapped the blanket around his shoulders, then held out the $20 bill. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks north on Main Street. It stays open all night. Go there, get warm, buy food, whatever you need. Her voice was steadier now. Decided. The soldier stared at the money, his glowing eyes confused. I have military credentials. I will repay. I don't want it back. Laura was already standing up, already backing away. Katie was home alone with the neighbor checking in. She needed to get back. Someone helped me once when I had nothing. Now it's your turn to receive. Wait. The soldier struggled to stand, using the wall for support. Your name, please. Laura Bennett, she called over her shoulder. Now go get warm before you actually freeze to death out here. She got in her car and drove away, her hands gripping the steering wheel tight. The whole way home she kept thinking about that $20. About how she'd just given away Katie's medicine money to an alien soldier she'd never see again. About how she was probably the biggest idiot in Arizona. But she'd done it anyway. Because someone was dying and she could help. That had to count for something. Behind the dumpster, Wing Commander Theron of the Northern Ridge watched her taillights disappear into the night. He looked down at the human money in his clawed hand, the steaming thermos, the worn blanket that smelled like kindness. In his own language, he spoke an oath that would ripple across 42 years. I will remember this. By scale and sky and star, I will remember. Life didn't magically get better for Laura Bennett after that cold November night. If anything, it got harder. She came home to find Katie's fever had spiked again. Without the medicine, they ended up in the emergency room at 3 in the morning. The bill for that visit? $800. Added to the pile of other bills she couldn't pay. Laura picked up a second job cleaning offices downtown. Then a third job on weekends doing data entry from home. She became a master at stretching $1 until it screamed. Pasta with butter counted as dinner. Water soup was what she called it when things got really tight. Just broth and whatever vegetables were on sale. She told Katie they were having adventures, treasure hunts at thrift stores, camping indoors when the electricity got shut off. The eviction notices became routine. She'd get the red paper taped to her door and somehow, some way she'd scrape together enough to buy another month. She borrowed from one credit card to pay another. Took payday loans that charged interest rates that should have been illegal. Sold everything that wasn't nailed down. But Katie never went hungry. Katie always had school supplies. Katie got to go to her friends' birthday parties with a present in hand, even if Laura had to skip meals that week to afford it. When Katie graduated high school with a full scholarship to college, Laura cried for an hour straight. But scholarships didn't cover everything. There were books, housing deposits, a laptop for classes. Laura took out loans, signed papers she didn't fully understand, put her signature on dotted lines that promised payment for decades. She never complained about it. Never called Katie asking for money when she graduated and got that engineering job in Colorado. Never mentioned how hard things were. That just wasn't who Laura was. And she never told anyone about the alien soldier behind the diner. Why would she? It seemed so small in the grand scheme of things. She'd given a stranger some coffee and $20. People did stuff like that every day. It didn't feel like something worth mentioning, just something she'd done because someone needed help and she could provide it. The years rolled on like they always do. Slow and fast at the same time. By 2024, Laura was 70 years old. Katie had 2 kids of her own now, living in Colorado with her husband. They called every Sunday like clockwork and Laura always said she was doing fine. Great, actually. Never better. The truth was different. Laura lived in a tiny studio apartment in a rough part of Phoenix. The kind of place where sirens were just background noise and you didn't make eye contact in the hallways. Her Social Security check came once a month and it barely covered rent. Food came from the dollar store and the discount shelf at the grocery store. She'd gotten good at making a can of soup last 2 days. The medical bills sat in the drawer of her tiny kitchen table. She didn't even open them anymore. What was the point? Her heart condition needed medication that cost $300 a month even with Medicare. She took half doses to make the pills stretch further. The hospital bills from her chest pains last year had hit almost $70,000. They'd sent it to collections months ago. The eviction notice came on a Monday. She had until the following Tuesday to vacate. Rent had gone up again and she'd fallen 3 months behind. There was no rabbit to pull out of the hat this time. No miracle coming. She'd already sold everything worth selling. Laura looked at that notice for a long time, then folded it carefully and put it with the medical bills. She started packing her things into the boxes she'd saved from the last move. This was just how life went sometimes. You did your best and sometimes your best wasn't enough. She didn't feel sorry for herself. She'd had a good run. Raised a beautiful daughter. Had 2 grandkids who video called her with gap-toothed smiles. That was more than a lot of people got. What Laura didn't know was that 2,000 miles away in Houston, inside the massive Dracker military complex that sprawled across 50 acres of Texas prairie, an old soldier was thinking about her. Supreme Marshal Theron of the Northern Ridge sat in his private quarters, staring at something he'd kept for 42 years. A crystal case, perfectly sealed and climate-controlled, containing a single $20 bill. The paper had yellowed slightly despite his care. Andrew Jackson's face stared out from behind the protective glass. Theron looked at this bill every single day. He'd told the story behind it hundreds of times. To new recruits. To visiting dignitaries. To his own children when they asked why their father kept human money like it was made of gold. The human who gave everything, the story was called now. It had become legend among the Dracker. Young soldiers would reference it in training. Officers would invoke it when discussing honor and duty. But Theron had never forgotten that it wasn't just a story. It was real. She was real. Laura Bennett was a real person who'd saved his life, and he'd spent 4 decades rising through military ranks without ever repaying her. When word came that the coalition was scaling back Earth operations, Theron realized he was running out of time. He made a request that surprised everyone. He wanted to use military intelligence resources to locate a human civilian. A woman named Laura Bennett. Last known location, Phoenix, Arizona. His second-in-command, a young officer named Varys, brought him the file personally. She watched her commander's face as he read it, saw the way his scales darkened with emotion. "Sir?" Varys asked carefully. "Is this the human from the story?" "Yes," Theron said quietly. He read the report again, unwilling to believe it. Laura Bennett. Age 70. Monthly income, $1,042. Monthly expenses, $1,300 not including medical. Credit score, 420. Medical debt, $93,600. Status, eviction pending. "She saved my life," Theron said, and his voice cracked with something humans would recognize as grief. "And we left her to suffer. I left her to suffer. Sir, you didn't know. I should have looked sooner." Theron stood abruptly, the crystal case clutched in his clawed hand. "Prepare a convoy. Full ceremonial guard. I'm invoking the debt of scale." Varys's eyes went wide. The debt of scale. The highest honor in Dracker culture, reserved for those who saved a warrior's life. It required repayment sevenfold, witnessed by all, bound by blood oath. It had never been invoked for a human. "Sir, the council will question this use of resources." Theron turned to face her, and his eyes blazed with 4 decades of remembered shame. "She taught me what honor truly means. When I had nothing, not even heat to keep my heart beating, she gave me everything she had. I will not die with this debt unpaid. Assemble the convoy." "Yes, sir." Varys hesitated at the door. "Sir, what exactly did she give you?" Theron held up the crystal case. $20. Her last $20. Varys stared, trying to understand. $20 was nothing. Even in 1982, that barely bought anything. "It was everything she had," Theron said softly. "That's what matters, Varys. She didn't give me what she could spare. She gave me what she couldn't afford to give. That's the difference between charity and sacrifice." The convoy rolled into Phoenix on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind of overcast day where the sky looked like dirty cotton and the air felt heavy with coming rain. People stopped what they were doing to stare. The guy walking his dog on 7th Street froze mid-step. The woman getting her mail dropped her letters on the sidewalk. Even the kids waiting for the school bus forgot to look at their phones. 6 military Humvees painted in desert camouflage, each one bearing 2 flags. The American flag on one side and on the other something most people had only seen on TV, the silver and crimson banner of the Dracker High Command. Behind them came 2 massive armored personnel carriers, the kind that looked like they could drive through a building without noticing. At the front was a command vehicle, larger than the others, with more flags and what looked like ceremonial banners flowing in the wind. The convoy moved slowly, deliberately, like a funeral procession. People pulled out their phones. This was definitely going on social media. Laura was in her tiny studio apartment, wrapping dishes in old newspaper and putting them in boxes. She'd found a shelter across town that had an opening. Not ideal, but it was a roof. She'd survived worse. That's when she heard the noise outside. Voices. Lots of them. Her neighbors didn't usually make that much commotion unless something big was happening. A fire maybe, or a police situation. She looked out her window, pushing aside the thin curtain, and her heart literally stuttered in her chest. Military vehicles. A whole line of them. And they were stopping. Right in front of her building. Laura's mind went immediately to the worst place. Katie. Something had happened to Katie. Or the grandkids. That's what military visits meant, right? Bad news delivered in person. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone from the counter. She had Katie's number pulled up, finger hovering over the call button, when someone knocked on her door. Except it wasn't really a knock. It was 3 heavy, deliberate thuds that rattled the door in its frame. Boom, boom, boom. Like someone was using a hammer instead of knuckles. Laura's legs felt weak as she walked to the door. She put her hand on the knob, took a breath, and opened it. The hallway was full of them. Drakkar soldiers. At least a dozen of them, maybe more. They wore ceremonial armor that gleamed under the hallway's flickering fluorescent lights. Bronze and silver plates covered their chests, etched with designs Laura couldn't begin to understand. Their scales looked polished, catching the light like metal. Wings were folded against their backs with perfect military precision. Each one stood at rigid attention, not moving, barely breathing. Her neighbors were peeking out of their doors, eyes wide, phones recording everything. At the front of the formation stood one who was clearly older than the rest. His scales had lost some of their shine, dulled by age. Scars crisscrossed his face and arms, the kind that told stories of battles and close calls. He had to be at least 7.5 feet tall, maybe 8. But it was his eyes that caught Laura's attention. Amber-colored, glowing slightly in the dim hallway, and filled with something that looked almost like fear. In his clawed hands he held a crystal case. Inside it was a $20 bill. Laura stared at that bill and felt the world tilt sideways. Laura Bennett? The old warrior's voice was deep and rumbling, like distant thunder. Each word was pronounced carefully, precisely like he'd practiced saying her name. Yes. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. She couldn't stop staring at that $20 bill behind the crystal. Then the old warrior did something that made every soldier behind him go rigid with shock. He lowered himself to one knee. This massive, scarred, ancient warrior knelt in her doorway, bowing his head. My name is Theron of the Northern Ridge, Supreme Marshal of the Drakkar Third Fleet. He raised the crystal case so she could see it clearly. 42 years ago, on a cold night in November, you saved my life. You gave me this. You gave me everything. Laura's mind was spinning. 42 years ago. November. A cold night. The memory came back in pieces. The diner. The parking lot. The breathing sound behind the dumpsters. A soldier dying from the cold, scales rattling like bones. She'd given him coffee. A blanket. And $20. Her last $20. Katie's medicine money. Oh my God, Laura breathed. Her hand went to her mouth. That was you. That was me. Theron's voice carried down the hallway, and Laura realized more neighbors had come out to watch. Mrs. Patterson from 3B had her phone up, recording. The college kids from across the hall were leaning out, eyes huge. I don't understand, Laura said, shaking her head. That was just $20. I just helped someone who needed it. It wasn't anything special. No. Theron rose to his feet, and when he spoke again, his voice carried weight that made the air feel heavy. It was everything. You gave me everything you had when I had nothing. You asked for nothing in return. You didn't even stay to be thanked. He gestured behind him, and the soldiers parted like a curtain. Through the gap, Laura could see down the stairs, out the building's front door, to where the military vehicles sat. More Drakkar stood outside, along with human soldiers she hadn't even noticed before. I have come to repay the debt of scale, Theron said. The highest honor my people can bestow. You saved my life, Laura Bennett. And it has taken me 42 years to find you and make this right. Laura looked at this ancient warrior, at the soldiers filling her hallway, at the convoy outside, and finally at the $20 bill in its crystal case. Her $20. The money she'd given to a dying stranger because it was the right thing to do. But I didn't do it for a reward, she whispered. We know, Theron said gently. That is exactly why you deserve one. Outside, news helicopters were beginning to circle. Someone had called the media. This was about to become very, very public. And Laura Bennett, 70 years old and 5 days from being homeless, had absolutely no idea what was about to happen. Theron insisted the ceremony happen in Laura's apartment, and he wouldn't budge on it. When reporters and military officials suggested moving to a more suitable location, maybe the convention center downtown or even the Drakkar base in Houston, he shut them down immediately. The debt was incurred in her home, he explained to the news crews gathering outside. It will be repaid in her home. That is our way. So Laura's tiny studio apartment, all 400 square feet of it, became the center of something she couldn't even begin to understand. She sat in her old armchair, the one with the spring poking through on the left side that she'd learned to avoid. The same chair where she ate her meals, watched TV, and sometimes fell asleep because her bed was only 6 feet away anyway. Now that chair felt like a throne she didn't want. Drakkar soldiers moved through her apartment with purpose, transforming it into something that belonged in a museum or a dream. They hung banners from her ceiling, long strips of fabric covered in symbols that seemed to shimmer and move in the light. Some showed stars and planets. Others had writing in a language that looked like flowing water frozen mid-splash. They brought in braziers, these tall ornate metal stands, and lit them with flames that burned blue and silver without any smoke. Laura kept waiting for her smoke detector to go off, but the flames didn't smell like burning. They smelled like ozone and something sweet she couldn't identify. People kept arriving. More Drakkar soldiers in ceremonial armor. Human military officers in dress uniforms covered with medals. News crews with cameras that had to stay in the hallway because there was no room inside. Laura's neighbors crowded around her doorway, phones out, recording everything. Mrs. Patterson was crying. The college kid from 4C looked like he might pass out from excitement. Laura felt like she was watching all of this happen to someone else. Like she was floating above her body, looking down at this 70-year-old woman in worn jeans and a cardigan, surrounded by alien warriors and military brass. Theron stood in the center of her tiny living room, somehow making the cramped space feel bigger just by his presence. He held that crystal case with the $20 bill like it was made of diamonds. By the old codes and the ancient ways, Theron began, and every conversation stopped. Every phone camera focused on him. I invoked the debt of scale. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the entire room, the hallway, probably the whole building. It had weight to it. History. Like he was speaking words that had been spoken for thousands of years. Laura Bennett of Phoenix, Earth. He looked directly at her. 42 years ago, you gave me life when you had none to spare. You offered warmth when cold would have taken me. You showed me honor that transcends species and stars. He gestured, and a younger Drakkar soldier, Varys, Laura would learn later, stepped forward carrying a chest. It was made of some dark wood Laura didn't recognize, with silver inlays that caught the light from the ceremonial flames. The debt of scale must be repaid sevenfold, Theron continued. This is our most sacred law. A life debt can never go unpaid. He nodded to another soldier who held up a tablet computer. Official-looking documents appeared on the screen. Your dwelling. This building and the land it stands upon has been purchased. It is yours now, held in trust for you and your bloodline. You will never face eviction again. Your daughter and her children will inherit this property. Laura's hand flew to her mouth. Her building. The whole building. She didn't even own her apartment, and now she owned the building? Your medical care, Theron said, and his voice softened. Past, present, and future. Every bill, every treatment, every medication. It is covered by the Drakkar Medical Fund. You will want for nothing in your remaining years. The tears started then. Laura couldn't stop them. All those bills in her drawer. All those medications she'd been skipping or cutting in half. All those doctor appointments she'd canceled because she couldn't afford the copay. A pension equal to that of a Drakkar wing commander will be established in your name, Theron continued. Backdated to November 1982, the night you showed me mercy. The accumulated payments, with interest, will be transferred to your account. One of the human officers whispered to another, and Laura caught the words 6 figures and annually. Then Theron opened the chest. Inside, resting on dark velvet, was a scale. Not a small one like you'd find on a lizard. This was the size of a dinner plate, crimson red that seemed to glow with its own internal light. It was mounted in silver that had been carved with intricate designs, stars, flames, and symbols Laura couldn't read. Even the human soldiers in the room gasped. One of them whispered, I didn't think those were real. The crimson scale of honor, Theron said, lifting it carefully from the chest. The highest civilian honor my people can bestow. In 5,000 years of Drakkar history, only 12 have ever been given. He looked at Laura. You are the 13th. You are the first human to ever receive it. You are the first to ever deserve it. He placed the scale in Laura's trembling hands. It was warm and heavier than it looked. The inscription reads, Theron said quietly, when we had nothing, she gave everything. This is what humanity means. Laura stared at the scale, at the alien writing she couldn't read, at this impossible thing in her hands. She looked up at Theron, at this warrior she'd helped 42 years ago, and found her voice. "I didn't do it for this," she whispered. "I didn't do it for any reward. I didn't even think about it. Someone needed help, so I helped." "We know," Theron said gently. He knelt down, bringing his massive frame level with her chair, his eyes meeting hers. "That is exactly why you deserve it. You humans, you help because it's right. Not because it benefits you. Not because you'll be repaid. You help because someone is suffering and you can't look away. That is your gift. That is your strength." Outside, Laura could hear helicopters, sirens, the buzz of a crowd gathering. Her phone had been buzzing nonstop with calls and texts. This was becoming news. Big news. But in that moment, in her tiny apartment, there were only two people who truly understood what this meant. An old woman who'd given her last $20 to a stranger. And an old warrior who'd spent 42 years trying to figure out how to say thank you. "I just gave you $20, Laura whispered. "No," Theron said, and his voice cracked with emotion Laura didn't know his species could feel. "You gave me faith that there was good in the universe. You gave me hope when I was dying alone behind a dumpster. You gave me a lesson I carried for 42 years and taught to every soldier under my command." He touched the crystal case containing that $20 bill. "This $20 taught me more about honor than 40 years of military service ever could." The press conference happened right there on the street outside Laura's building. The police had to shut down 2 blocks because of the crowd. News vans lined up like dominoes, satellite dishes pointing at the sky. Reporters from every major network elbowed for position. Camera crews from countries Laura had never heard of were setting up tripods. Theron stood on a hastily assembled platform, looking out at hundreds of faces and even more cameras. He'd faced enemy fleets, survived battles that killed thousands, given orders that decided the fate of planets. But standing here about to explain something so simple and yet so profound, he felt more nervous than he had in decades. "Humans ask why we honor one act of kindness so greatly," he began, his voice amplified through speakers that carried his words down the street. "Why we mobilize military resources, invoke ancient rites, bestow our highest honors for $20 given decades ago." He let that question hang in the air. Let the reporters think about it. Let the world watching on live television really consider it. Because Laura Bennett showed us what your species truly is. Theron held up the crystal case so every camera could see that $20 bill. "You are not the strongest race we've encountered in the stars. Not the most technologically advanced. Not the most numerous or the most powerful." He paused and his voice softened. "But you are the kindest, the most compassionate, the most willing to sacrifice for complete strangers. And that, we have learned, is a strength that surpasses all others." A reporter shouted something about military protocol, but Theron ignored it. "In our darkest moment, when we had nothing, not even the warmth to keep living, a human gave us everything. Not because she would be rewarded. Not because it benefited her in any way. She gave because someone needed help and she could provide it. Even though it cost her greatly." Theron looked directly into the cameras, knowing his words were being broadcast across the planet, across the solar system, across the coalition networks that span dozens of worlds. "This is not an isolated incident. We have watched your species for years now, studied you. In every disaster, humans run toward danger to help others. When buildings collapse, you dig with your bare hands. When floods come, you share your boats. In every crisis, you give what you cannot afford to give. You call it compassion. We call it what makes humanity extraordinary." A reporter from CNN managed to shout loud enough to be heard. "Sir, with respect, why did you wait 42 years? Why not find her sooner?" Theron's expression darkened, and for a moment he looked every one of his many years. "Because I failed her. Because I let time and duty and military obligations make me forget the most important oath I ever swore. I do not ask Laura Bennett for forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I can ensure that no other human who shows such kindness is ever forgotten again." He gestured to the soldiers standing in formation behind him. "Every Drakkar warrior will now carry a copy of this story. Every new recruit will learn Laura Bennett's name. And we are establishing a fund, the Bennett Memorial Fund, to locate and honor humans who show extraordinary compassion. Because your world should not forget its best people. We will help you remember them." The questions kept coming, but Theron stepped down. He'd said what needed to be said. Katie arrived late that afternoon, having driven straight through from Colorado. She'd gotten the first panicked call from a neighbor, then seen the news, then tried calling her mother 40 times while speeding down the interstate at 80 miles an hour. She found her mother sitting in that old armchair, still holding the crimson scale, surrounded by Drakkar honor guards who stood at attention like living statues. The apartment was still decorated with alien banners. The ceremonial flames still burned in their braziers. "Mom," Katie breathed, taking in the scene. The guards. The scale. The news playing on every device. The hashtag humanity first trending worldwide alongside hashtag dead of scale. "Why didn't you ever tell me about this? About helping that soldier?" Laura looked at her daughter with those same kind, tired eyes. The same eyes that had looked at a dying alien and seen someone who needed help. "Tell you what, honey? That I gave someone money when they needed it? That's not something special. That's just what you do." Katie stared at her mother. The whole world was losing its mind over this story. Her mother had just been given wealth she couldn't even calculate, honors that would make her famous forever, recognition from an alien species that spanned multiple star systems. And Laura Bennett genuinely didn't understand what the big deal was. That's when Katie understood what the Drakkar had been trying to say. That's when she got it. Theron, standing quietly in the corner, watched this exchange and felt something click into place. Laura Bennett still didn't grasp what she'd done. She'd changed his life. Influenced how an entire species viewed humanity. Become a legend told across the stars. And she still saw it as nothing more than common decency. That, he realized, was the most human thing of all. They did extraordinary things and genuinely believed they were ordinary. That evening, as the Drakkar fleet prepared to depart Earth orbit, Theron recorded one final message. It would be broadcast on every coalition ship, archived on every allied world, taught to every generation of Drakkar for centuries to come. "We came to Earth as allies," he said into the camera. "We leave having learned what it truly means to be human. They are stronger than they know. Not in weapons or ships or technology, but in their unbreakable will to help each other. To give when they have nothing. To show mercy when survival says they shouldn't." He touched the crystal case one last time, that $20 bill still safe inside. "We Drakkar pride ourselves on honor. On duty. On strength. But Laura Bennett taught us that true honor isn't something you wear like armor. It's something you do when no one is watching. When there's no reward coming. When it costs you everything you have." The message ended with a simple image. That $20 bill, preserved for 42 years, with a caption that would be translated into 100 languages. She gave her last $20. She saved more than a life, she saved our faith in goodness. This is humanity. The Drakkar didn't leave Earth empty-handed that night. They left something behind. A monument in downtown Phoenix, unveiled 6 months later. A bronze statue of Laura Bennett, standing in a parking lot, holding out a cup of coffee to an unseen stranger. The plaque at the base was written in both English and Drakkar. "When we had nothing, she gave everything. This is what humanity means." Laura lived another 15 years after that day. Comfortable, cared for, with her medical bills paid and her family close. Katie moved back to Phoenix. The grandkids visited every weekend. Laura never charged rent to the other tenants in her building, even though she owned it now. She never truly understood why such a small act had meant so much. But that was exactly the point. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't that they did remarkable things and knew it. It was that they did remarkable things and called them ordinary. They saved lives and called it Tuesday. They gave everything and called it nothing. That's what made them extraordinary. That's what made them human.